Let's focus on the word unusual. Forget cruel for the moment, although they're both obviously involved. We've seen very substantial demonstration that world opinion is against this, at least as interpreted by the leaders of the European Union. Does that have a bearing on what's unusual? So suppose it was shown that the United States was one of the very, very few countries that executed juveniles, and that's true. Does that have a bearing on whether or not it's unusual?
No more than if we were one of the very few countries that didn't do this, it would bear on the question of unusual. The decision as to the Eighth Amendment should not be based on what happens in the rest of the world. It needs to be based on the mores of American society.
Have the countries of the European Union abolished the death penalty by popular vote?
I don't know how they've done that.
I thought they did it by reason of a judgment of a court,
well, in fact,
which required all of them to abolish it.
I believe that.
And I thought that some of the public opinion polls in a number of the countries support the death penalty.
I believe that there are countries in Europe who abolish it because of their membership in the European Union.
I acknowledge that in my question. I recognize there's the leadership in many of these countries that objects to it. But let us assume that it's an accepted practice in most countries of the world not to execute a juvenile for moral reasons. That has no bearing on whether or not what we're doing is unusual?
I can't concede that it does, because it's unimaginable to me that we would be willing to accept the alternative, the flip side of that argument. It does seem to me, however, that goes to a particular back to the aspect where I began.
Is there any on that? Is there any indication? I mean, I've never seen any either way, to tell you the truth, but that Madison or Jefferson or whoever, when they were writing the Constitution, would have thought what happened elsewhere, let's say in Britain or in the British colony. They were a British colony. They did think Blackstone was relevant. That they would have thought it was totally irrelevant what happened elsewhere in the world to the word unusual? Is there any indication in any debate or any of the ratification convention?
Nothing that I have seen
so if
has
Lincoln,
suggested that.
Abraham Lincoln used to study Blackstone, and I think he thought that the founding fathers studied Blackstone, and all that happened in England was relevant. Is there some special reason why what happens abroad would not be relevant here? Relevant, but not saying controlling.
There's a special reason why Blackstone would be relevant, because that was the law from which they were operating when they put this language into the Constitution.
Absolutely, and they guess we're looking at English practices, and would they have thought it was wrong to look abroad as a relevant feature?
And I don't know the answer to that.
Do we ever take the position that what we do here should influence what people think elsewhere?
I have not seen that overtly in any of the Court's opinions, Your Honor.
You
thought that Mr. Jefferson thought that what we did here had no bearing in the rest of the world?
Oh, I think Mr. Jefferson thought that. I think many of the founders thought that they were leading the world. And I have no objection to us leading the world, but Mr. Jefferson's lead of the world was through the legislature, not through the courts.
But did he not also say that to lead the world, we would have to show a decent respect for the opinions of mankind?
That may well be.
What did John Adams think of the French?
I read a biography of John Adams recently. I recall that he didn't think highly of them.